Ugh. Everything you wanted to know about acrylics, but were afraid to ask. Today on Laser Nug. Welcome back. We're going to talk about acrylics today. I've only had my laser for about 12 months. In fact, 12 months come next week. But I primarily use acrylics in most all of the designs or the work or the custom work that I do. Works great by itself or with different colors mixed as inlays. Works well with plywoods, different types of woods. You can use it in so many different ways. However, I know a few folks are a little hesitant to try acrylics. It's an awesome material. This Thunderbolt does a wicked job of cutting and engraving it. And I'm going to share with you all of the things, or as many things as I can, about what I've learned working with acrylics, how I do it, and why I do it the way I do. So I hope you folks will stick around for a few minutes with me. At the end of the video, I'm going to go through all of my Thunder Laser Bolt settings that I use with acrylics, just for those of you that are interested. And if you haven't tried acrylics, I hope you'll give it a shot. As you know, a lot of people have different experiences or have different types of advice when working with acrylics. So I'm by no means an expert, but I'll share with you the things that I do when I use it, cutting and engraving it, or when I'm using it in projects. Let's do this. There's a variety of different acrylics that you can work with and use in your custom designs or your creations. You can get them in pretty much any color you can think of. Not only do you get glossy or matte finishes, you also get pastels now, you've got glitter, you've got semi-translucent or semi-transparent, the classic mirrored acrylic. There just seems to be an unending variety of different types and colors of acrylics. So to start with, when possible, I'd highly recommend you always get a cast acrylic, not an extruded acrylic. Extruded acrylics tend to engrave and cut very differently, and they tend not to come out as clean or as good looking as a cast acrylic. So I tend to stay away from the extruded acrylics, with one exception. Your mirrored acrylics, they tend to almost always be extruded. I found one supplier that has a cast mirrored acrylic, a little more expensive, but a far away from me. So I've just learned to adjust a little bit using these extruded acrylics. But as far as the regular colors, shades, and the varieties, I always get cast. For my Thunderbolt, I find that it works the best. Most of your colored acrylics are going to come in either a glossy finish, or now more and more colors are coming in a matte finish. And in fact, most recently, I've been able to find sheets that are matte on one side and glossy on the other. They cost a little more than the standard sheet, but what I found when working with the acrylics is this way I don't have to buy two sheets of black or green or red. I can buy one sheet, and I know that if I need a matte side, I flip it over. If I want a glossy finish on my design, I use the other side. Like I said, it's a personal choice, but I've just found over the last several months, it's much more efficient for me to just buy a two-sided sheet, matte and glossy. Some of your suppliers are going to have that, some of them won't. Generally speaking, when you get your sheets, you're going to find that it either has a thin plastic sheet for protection, or if you're fortunate, your sheet will come with a paper mask, so to speak, as protection. I always prefer when they give me the paper, because that way I don't have to mask my piece if I'm engraving, and I find that it tends to protect much better than the plastic. If you're picking up your sheet, always take a look really carefully at all the scratch marks. You're going to have scratch marks on the sheet, but what you're looking for is to make sure that those scratch marks haven't actually penetrated the protective film and actually hit the acrylic itself. It's kind of disappointing when you pull your sheet out to try to create your product, and when you peel it off at the end, you've got a big scar across it. So it's important to check that out. When I'm using it in my Thunderbolt, if I'm cutting or I'm using a line mode, I never ever take this translucent or transparent protective film off. I leave it on. It'll cut really cleanly, and it allows you to keep the piece protected until the end when you're about to peel it and finish it all up. Some folks will suggest that leaving that film on produces some kind of harmful fumes. The Bolt has an excellent exhaust system, and in the event I do feel the need, I've got a respirator, as you know. But generally speaking, I don't find any issue, I don't smell anything, and I like to keep it left on so it keeps the piece clean right through to the end of the project. However, if I'm engraving, I always take the plastic off and I put a mask on it. I've learned the hard way that if you attempt to engrave that acrylic with the plastic sheet on it, that plastic is going to contract and it's actually going to melt into your engrave. So you've got to remove the plastic and you've got to mask the piece. So if I'm in a position where I'm going to do an engrave as well as a cut, I'll take the plastic right off, I'll cover it back with mask, and then I'll put it in the laser. That way I know I'm in good shape, I won't have anything melted into the engraved sections, and I'll still get that nice clean cut. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer it when I pick up my sheets from the supplier that I'm getting pieces that already have that paper protective film, because then I don't have to mask it or do anything to it. The important thing is, if you don't leave the film on before you start engraving or cutting, you'll end up with this type of an output. Acrylic is a form or a type of plastic, and when you put it under heat, all of that dust that you see coming off your engrave will almost literally melt into the sheet around it, as you see here, right here. And trying to get that off takes a while, and in some cases you're not going to get it all off without damaging the surface of the acrylic. Acrylic is a super soft material, easily scratched, and it picks up everything. Fingerprints, smudges. So what I found over the last year is that if I keep the mask on, all of that more or less melted residue ends up on the mask and not on the piece. So I get a nice clean piece every time I peel that mask off. Several folks on YouTube suggest that you should peel the mask off or the protective film and spray it with WD-40. Or take dish soap and rub the dish soap on the acrylic and wait for it to dry before you put it in the laser. Perhaps that works good for some folks. I've just found that that's a lot of work to do for something that's already pre-protected and can go straight into the bolt the way it is. Not to mention my cleanup is so simple and so quick. I'm not taking it to a sink and trying to get these other products off of the surface, and I don't have to worry about scarring or marring. But hey, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert, and I think you find that whatever works for you is what you should do. By keeping it masked, whether it's with the mask that comes with it or maintaining that transparent film when you're just cutting, here's all I have to do to clean it up. If I'm just cutting the acrylic, there's no cleanup at all. You pull the pieces out, they're still masked with either that transparent film or a paper film, and I leave it that way until after I've finished my gluing and put the piece together. If I've engraved it, once I pull it out of the bolt, I give it a shot of some air. I usually set this to 100 psi. As I've said before, I've had this since I was in my early 20s, so it's pretty old. But it's a simple, small, very inexpensive air compressor. Gives me more than enough psi. I shoot it to get most of that debris off, and I tend to follow that with just about anything I put in the bolt now. And then all I have to do to clean it is I dip a toothbrush in some water, and I just scrub out the inside of that engrave, and then I just use a damp microfiber cloth to clean it out. That's literally the entire cleanup. Done. Takes less than a minute. When you're working with a mirrored acrylic, I always cut from the back and engrave from the back, because your mirrored surface is in fact in behind your clear acrylic, which is then covered by a painted surface. There's actually 3 surfaces involved in that mirrored acrylic. So I always reverse my image in Lightburn, send it to the bolt, I place it face down or mirrored side down, and I always engrave and cut from the back of the mirrored piece. I'm not sure if there's truth to it, but I have seen or heard on YouTube, and I've been told that it's possible that if you're cutting from the top, that reflective surface might reflect your laser beam back. I'm not sure what truth there is to that, but for me, generally when I'm using a mirrored acrylic, I'm quite often engraving something, and you need to engrave from the back. And when I do engrave it, I don't mask it, because it's already got a painted finish on the top, and it engraves really cleanly. Final assembly. Always wear gloves. As I mentioned, that acrylic is a very soft material. It'll pick up all your fingerprints, any smudges, any type of lints if you're not using a microfiber cloth. And the gloves just help out because it keeps all of that clean off of your piece, as well as if you're working with different types of glues or any type of WeldOn. Let me talk to you about how I put my pieces together. There's a few things I've used over the last year to put my pieces together or do my final assembly or gluing, and they all have a different or a specific purpose. You can use a 3M backer. I tend to use the 467, not the 468, because it's a little thinner and it works well with acrylics. Even when you're putting that acrylic onto a piece of MDF or plywood, it's a quick, efficient, and very clean way of getting your pieces to adhere to each other or gluing together. You, of course, always apply this before you put it into the bolt, and you got to make sure that you peel that backing off the piece before you apply your 3M first. A solvent cement, such as WeldOn number 4, or here in Ontario, I can get this from Cesco. It's pretty much the same stuff. It's a big long name, starts with a D, I can't pronounce it. But these literally will weld your acrylics together. So if you're placing pieces on top of other pieces, you can apply this anywhere that you don't want to see glue. And what I mean by that is when this is applied to the pieces, they literally melt the two acrylics together as one. And it's pretty much invisible, which is why you'll see a lot of people working with clear acrylics use primarily only this, because any other types of glues are going to show through the clear. So whether you've engraved a pocket on the receiving piece or you've scored it so you know where to put your top pieces, this provides a final weld. However, I understand from my supplier that this WeldOn number 4 is either discontinued or soon to be discontinued. I can still get the same stuff from my local supplier, a different supplier. But when you're using the WeldOn, you'll find that 9 times out of 10 it comes with a little squeeze bottle, kind of like this one, or like this one. And these are absolutely terrible. They're very, very cheaply made squeeze bottles, which allow air in. And you're going to find, at least as I have, that they're very difficult to control flow. In fact, you really can't control the flow very well. Wherever you're picking up your WeldOn, they most likely will also sell syringes. And they sell them very, very inexpensively. They'll also sell the needle ends or the syringe ends for those. And this I found over the last 10 months is the absolute best way of applying that WeldOn. You have almost absolute control of it. It's very tightly pointed and you can get it into the seams really easily. One caution with your WeldOn, should never use this in conjunction with a mirrored acrylic because it basically eats away the paint and the mirroring background off of that acrylic. It'll look fine for about a minute or two, but over the coming several minutes, you're going to start seeing rippling or stippling, and you'll see that the paint and the mirrored finish start to dissolve or disappear or become very damaged looking anywhere you've put the WeldOn. So definitely not recommended to be used with any type of mirrored acrylic. What do I use? Quite often, I'll use this number 16 acrylic cement. This stuff works excellent and it sets quickly, but you can, of course, use this if you're using any type of clear acrylic on the top and gluing underneath it because you're going to see the glue underneath that clear acrylic. But for colored pieces, works excellent. Quite often, I'll use this StarBond thick when I'm using an acrylic with a wood or a wood type product or other material, because the CA glue does an excellent job of adhesion between a clear or glossy acrylic and some other type of material. And when I use it, I generally always use it with one of these tiny little needle ends that you put on the top. That gives you much more control over how much glue you're putting on your piece. And this so far has worked with mirrored and any other acrylics that I've used. Assembly is complete. Your creation is together. You're going to peel off all your masks now that all your gluing is over or any type of adhesives you've used. And you've got your piece in front of you. And before you send it off to your customer, you're going to want to give it a quick clean. But there's only one thing I'd recommend you use to clean it. This is from a company called Novus, and this is their #1 basic cleaner for acrylic. Acrylics don't like harsh cleaners. So using things like Windex or any type of glass cleaners that have ammonia in them will harm and hurt the gloss finish on that acrylic. So you shouldn't use them. Generally, they're saying that you should use water, and if you have to use a very mild detergent, something to soap it, that you need to use something that has no harsh chemicals in it. However, where you pick up your acrylic sheets should carry something similar to this Novus product. This is a #1. This is just for simple cleaning. This will clean your acrylics without causing the gloss to darken or to shadow, and it removes all your fingerprints, all of your lint marks, those kind of things. I always use it with a microfiber cloth because you'll find that any type of cloth with lint will show up all over that acrylic pretty quickly. So I give my piece a final spray and a quick wipe with this before I wrap it up. If you find at the end of it that you've got any type of surface scratches in that acrylic that maybe you didn't notice before, Novus has a number 2 and 3 bottle, which is used kind of similar to a compound wax, you know, we used to use when we were younger. If we had surface scratches in the paint on our car, we could rub that compound wax in and it somehow removed the surface scratches. That's what I believe their number 2 and 3 will do for that acrylic. So you can look that up online or find out from your supplier, and he'll probably give you better directions how to use it. So far I haven't needed it because I usually check my acrylic pretty clearly before I start using it. But your number 1 for sure is a must-have. Cleans it up nice and shiny just before you wrap it for your customer. So I think that kind of outlines all of kind of my general learnings and the way I handle acrylic. I find that it works best for me, but you may find different things that work better for you. Before we finish up the video, I promised you my settings. So I'm going to jump into Lightburn here into my materials library, and I'm just going to do a quick run through of the settings that hopefully will be helpful, or at least give you a place to start if you haven't yet started, you know, testing or playing with acrylics. Let's jump in. Okay, just a couple of quick things before I jump into these settings. I'm going to fly through these settings pretty quick, but I'll leave them up on screen for a few seconds. So if there is a setting you want to try, just pause the video so you can capture the settings. Second thing is, you're going to see that I never ever use air when I'm engraving acrylics. I only use high air when I'm cutting. I've just found over the last year I haven't needed to use air, and I find the result for engraving comes out much nicer if I don't put air on or turn on high air. I've never had any flaming or any issues with it, so I know some folks will give you settings on YouTube and tell you need air. You can try it with both. Of course, these are just starter settings or settings I use. You may want to change your settings, but it'll give you a place to start. Last thing, these settings work with the mask on as well as the transparent or the plastic film. They may or may not cut through if you're using 3M on the back, so it's just a little heads up for that. And lastly, they should pretty much work for any color, whether it's pastels, whether it's matte or glossy, except green. I don't know what it is with green, but for some reason, any shade of green, I tend to either have to cut twice or move my power setting up a little bit. So with that being said, let me give you my settings. So let's jump into my material library. Under acrylic, so my engrave settings for acrylic, I generally use this one here called Clear Less White Engrave. And that's for any color. Okay. If you're using a clear acrylic and you want more of a whiter engrave on it, I find these settings work better. If you're scoring the acrylic, there's my score settings. When I'm cutting a 1/8 or a 3 mil sheet, I use this one here, which, by the way, I got off of the Thunder Laser USA's initial starter material library. And I don't think I've ever recorded a 1/4 inch or 6 mil setting, so I can't help you there. But just in case, you can take a look at this guy here. That might work. For the acrylic mirror, although I just provided these video recently, there's my engrave settings for the back painted coating and the mirrored finish on the back of that acrylic. Remember, always reverse your image before you engrave. And there's my cut settings for mirrored acrylic. And that's a wrap. So we're going to wrap up another video. If you have not tried acrylics on your laser bolt, give it a shot. I promise you, you'll love the outcome, whether you're using a pastel, a glitter, a translucent, mirrored, or any other types of colors that are matte or glossy. You've got all kinds of stuff to choose from. And I think you might find when you start working it into some of your designs, it just gives it another dimension or a richness or a depth that wouldn't otherwise be there. Thanks for sticking around today. Have a great week. Have fun with that laser. Please be kind to each other. And I'll see you again right here. I'm Gord Potter, and you've been watching Laser Nug. Cheers.